You don't question Easter. Not really. You feel something slightly off, but you push it down. Because everyone around you treats it as sacred. Celebration, joy, resurrection. But here's the quiet tension most believers never say out loud. If Easter is about truth, why does it feel so rehearsed? And why does doubt get louder, not quieter, the older you get? The story that feels finished too early. Easter is presented as the conclusion. Death, then resurrection, then victory. It lands like a perfectly structured ending, the kind that feels satisfying because everything is resolved right on time. Clean, certain, almost too neat. But life does not move like that, does it? Real pain rarely follows a script. People do not suffer on Friday and wake up renewed by Sunday morning with a clear lesson and a peaceful smile. If anything, they wake up heavier, slower, carrying questions that did not exist before. You notice this if you pay attention. After loss, people do not say they feel victorious. They say they feel different, and not in a way that fits neatly into a sermon. Some become quieter, some more distant. Some start questioning things they never questioned before. That is not a clean arc. That is a disruption. So there is a gap, a quiet, almost invisible gap between the story you are told and the life you are actually living. And most people sense it, even if they never say it out loud. Because the story suggests that suffering leads directly to meaning. That pain is quickly redeemed. That everything resolves if you just hold on long enough. But experience says something else. Sometimes suffering just sits there, unresolved, lingering longer than expected, like a guest who forgot to leave. And here is where it becomes uncomfortable. If the story feels finished too early, then what happens to the parts of your life that are still unfinished? Where do those fit? It creates a quiet tension inside you, not loud enough to reject the story, but strong enough to question it. You start wondering if this is meant to describe reality as it is, or if it is presenting an ideal that you are supposed to measure yourself against. And if it is an ideal, then another question follows. What happens when you do not match it? The pressure to feel joy. Easter is supposed to feel uplifting. That is the expectation, even if no one says it directly. You walk into it already knowing the emotional script. Light, renewal, quiet happiness. A sense that something has been restored, even if you cannot fully explain what. But what if that is not what you feel? What if you sit there, listening, watching, and the only honest thought in your mind is much simpler? I do not feel renewed. I feel tired. Not dramatically broken, not lost, just tired, in a way that does not match the moment. And that is where the tension begins. Because now, there are two layers to your experience. The first is your actual feeling. The second is the feeling you believe you are supposed to have. And when those two do not match, something uncomfortable appears. Not doubt in the story itself, at least not yet, but doubt in yourself. You start asking quiet questions. Why am I not feeling this the way others seem to? What am I missing? Is there something wrong with me? That is where guilt enters, but not the obvious kind. It is a subtle guilt, almost polite. The kind that does not accuse you directly, but makes you feel slightly out of place. Like everyone else received a message you somehow did not get. And here is the strange part. You are no longer just dealing with your original struggle. You are now dealing with the feeling that you are experiencing that struggle incorrectly. It is like being sick and then being told you are holding the thermometer wrong. Over time, this creates a quiet pressure to perform, to adjust your expression, your words, even your thoughts, just enough to align with what is expected. Not in a dramatic way. In small ways. Nods, smiles, familiar phrases. And eventually, a deeper question begins to form. If a belief system tells you how you should feel in a given moment, what happens to your ability to trust your own inner state? Because once you start adjusting your feelings to fit the belief, it becomes harder to tell which one is leading. The missing middle. Everyone talks about the cross, the suffering, the sacrifice, the moment everything collapses, then everyone moves quickly to the resurrection. The victory, the meaning, the resolution that ties it all together, but almost no one lingers in what sits between those 2 points. that space, that waiting, that uncertainty that has no clear message attached to it. And that is interesting, because that is where most people actually live. Not in dramatic suffering with a clear purpose, not in miraculous resolution where everything suddenly makes sense, but in the middle. The long stretch, where nothing is explained, where answers do not arrive on schedule, where you are left holding questions that do not seem to go anywhere. This middle is quiet, and that is exactly why it gets overlooked. It does not make for a powerful sermon. It does not inspire applause. It does not offer a clean takeaway you can repeat over dinner. It just sits there. Think about it. The cross is intense, the resurrection is hopeful, but the middle is uncomfortable because it reflects something too familiar. It reflects the experience of waiting without clarity, of continuing without understanding, of waking up each day and realizing nothing has resolved yet. And here is the subtle tension. If the story moves quickly past that space, it leaves you with the impression that you should move quickly past it too. That uncertainty is temporary. That confusion is just a short phase before meaning arrives. But what if it is not? What if the middle is not a brief transition, but a real part of the human experience that does not follow a predictable timeline? Suddenly, the story feels slightly incomplete. Not wrong, but incomplete, like a conversation where the most honest part was politely skipped. It is a bit like watching a film where the character faces a crisis, disappears for a moment, and then returns completely transformed. You are expected to accept the change without seeing how it actually happened. Convenient, right? Because if you stay in the middle too long, you start asking questions that are harder to answer. Questions about why clarity takes so long. Questions about why silence feels more common than revelation. And those are not easy to package into a message that fits neatly into a single morning. The psychological contract. Easter asks for belief, but not just belief in the simple sense of accepting an idea. It asks for trust in something you cannot test, cannot repeat, cannot confirm the way you confirm anything else in life. And in return, it offers something very specific: meaning, hope, the promise that your life is not random, and more than that it continues beyond what you can see. That is not a small offer. That is everything people quietly want. So the exchange begins to look less like a casual belief and more like a contract. You give your trust, and in return, you receive a structure that explains your existence and softens the fear of ending. That is a powerful trade, almost too powerful, because of what it does to the mind once it is accepted. The moment you invest in that kind of promise, questioning it no longer feels neutral. It does not feel like examining an idea. It feels like risking something important, something personal. And that risk shows up in different ways. Intellectually, you might notice gaps or inconsistencies, but your mind hesitates to follow them too far. Emotionally, doubt does not feel like curiosity. It feels like loss. Socially, asking the wrong question can create distance between you and the people around you. No one says it directly, but you can feel it. And then there is the deeper layer, the existential one. If the promise is not true, then what replaces it? What takes its place? That is not a light question, so most people learn, often without realizing it, to stop just before they reach it. So they stay within the boundaries of the contract. Not because they lack intelligence, but because they understand, at some level, the cost of stepping outside it. This is why belief can feel stable for long periods of time. Not because every part of it has been tested and confirmed, but because the structure itself discourages that kind of testing. And that is not a flaw in people. It is a feature of being human. The symbol versus the reality. There is something else people quietly avoid, and once you notice it, it is difficult to ignore. Easter works beautifully as a symbol: death and rebirth, loss and renewal. It speaks to something deep and familiar, something people recognize even if they have never opened a religious text. You see it in nature. Seasons change, things fall apart, then something new emerges. You see it in aging, where parts of you fade, while other parts become clearer. You even see it in small, almost ridiculous moments, like a terrible haircut that somehow grows back into something respectable. Life has a way of recycling itself. That is why the story resonates so easily. It mirrors patterns people already experience. It gives shape to something that feels true on a personal level. But here is where the tension begins. A symbol invites you to reflect. It allows you to see your own life inside it. You can interpret it, question it, even reshape it slightly without breaking it. That is the strength of a symbol. It is flexible, open, almost alive. The moment that symbol becomes a literal claim, something changes. Now, it is no longer just about meaning. It is about accuracy. About whether a specific event happened in a specific way at a specific time. And those are two very different conversations. One asks, what does this reveal about life? The other asks, did this actually occur exactly as described? The first leaves room for personal truth. The second requires agreement on objective truth. And that shift is not always acknowledged. People move between those two modes without realizing it. One moment they are speaking in symbols. The next, they are defending history. That creates a quiet confusion. Because if you question the historical claim, it can sound like you are rejecting the meaning. But those are not the same thing. You can recognize the power of a story without committing to its literal form. And yet, in many belief systems, that distinction is not encouraged. Because once you separate the symbol from the reality, you gain freedom. Freedom to interpret, to question, to engage with the story on your own terms. And that kind of freedom is not always comfortable. The fear of pulling the thread. You ever notice how one small question can feel dangerous? Not loud, not dramatic. Just a quiet thought that shows up at the wrong time. What if this did not happen the way I was told? It sounds simple, almost harmless, the kind of question you would normally explore without hesitation. But here, it feels different. Because it does not stay small. It carries weight far beyond the sentence itself. The moment it appears, something in you hesitates. Not because the question is complex, but because of where it might lead. If one part feels uncertain, what else might start to shift? That is the real tension. It is not about being wrong on a detail, it is about what happens next. What happens if that one thread is connected to others, and pulling it does not just clarify one idea but begins to loosen the entire structure? And most people sense that instinctively. Belief is not just a collection of isolated claims. It is a system, a framework that organizes how you see life, how you understand suffering, how you define meaning, even how you think about your future. So questioning one part does not feel like a small adjustment. It feels like stepping onto unstable ground. That is why the hesitation feels so strong. It is not intellectual fear. It is structural. You are not just asking whether something is true. You are asking what happens if it is not. And that question has consequences. Because belief does more than provide answers. It provides stability. It gives a sense of orientation, like knowing where you are standing even when everything else feels uncertain. Take that away, and something deeper shifts. People do not just lose explanations, they lose footing. It is a bit like removing one supporting beam from a house. Maybe nothing collapses immediately. Maybe everything looks the same from the outside. But inside, there is a subtle awareness that things are no longer as solid as they were. And once you feel that, it is very hard to ignore. The social glue. Easter is not just belief. It is something much more ordinary, and in a strange way, much more powerful. It is community. It is sitting at a table with people you have known for years, sometimes decades. It is familiar conversations, familiar jokes, the same stories told slightly differently each time. It is traditions that feel almost automatic. You do not question them, you just step into them. The meals, the greetings, the shared language that only makes sense within that circle. And this is where things become more complicated than they appear. Because for many people, staying connected to Easter is not only about whether they are convinced by the belief itself, it is about what would happen if they stepped away from everything around it. Leaving is not just a personal decision, it has consequences that extend outward. Relationships shift, conversations become awkward, certain topics are avoided or approached with caution. Sometimes, people look at you differently, even if they try not to show it. So the decision is rarely just about truth. It is about belonging. You might not be completely certain anymore, but you still show up, you still participate, Not out of dishonesty, but out of something more human. The desire to stay connected. To not disrupt something that has been part of your life for so long. It is a bit like being part of a club, where you are no longer sure about all the rules, but you understand the rhythm. You know when to nod, when to smile, when to stay quiet. And to be fair, the people matter more than the rules most of the time. There is warmth in that. There is comfort in shared rituals, even if the meaning behind them feels slightly out of reach. Humans are not built to exist in isolation, and belief systems often double as social structures that hold people together. So when someone hesitates to question too deeply, it is not always about fear of being wrong. Sometimes it is about not wanting to lose what is still good. And yes, sometimes it is as simple as enjoying the gathering itself. The conversation, the atmosphere, the small pleasures that come with it. And the cake. Let's be honest, people have stayed committed to far more complicated systems for far less rewarding desserts. The quiet realization. Here is what many believers feel, but rarely say out loud. They are not rejecting Easter. Not suddenly, not dramatically. There is no clear moment where everything collapses and they walk away. It is quieter than that, slower, almost unnoticeable at first. They are just not as certain as they used to be. And that creates a very specific kind of space. Not full belief, where everything feels grounded and secure. Not full disbelief, where everything is clearly dismissed. Something in between. A kind of awareness. You still participate. You still understand the language. You still feel parts of it resonate. But at the same time, there is a layer of distance that was not there before. A subtle shift that changes how everything feels, even if nothing on the surface has changed. And awareness is uncomfortable. Because once you begin to see the questions, they do not go away. They do not politely return to where they came from. They stay. Quiet, persistent, sitting in the background of everything you hear and everything you repeat. You might not act on them immediately. You might not even want to, but they are there. And that changes something important. Before, belief felt automatic. Now, it requires attention. Before, the story felt complete. Now, it feels open. Unfinished. In ways you did not notice before. That can feel like something is slipping, like you are losing clarity or drifting away from something solid. But here is the part no one tells you. That feeling is not necessarily loss. It is not a sign that you are broken or that something has gone wrong inside you. It is a sign that you are paying attention. Because certainty is easy when questions are ignored. It is much harder when you allow yourself to see what does not fully fit. And that does not make you lost. It makes you honest. Honest enough to notice the tension. Honest enough to sit with it without rushing to resolve it. Honest enough to admit that something can feel meaningful and uncertain at the same time. And that kind of honesty is not the end of something. It is the beginning of actually understanding it. Easter is not just a story about resurrection. It also acts like a mirror, reflecting something deeper than the surface message. It reveals what people want to believe, what they hesitate to question, and what they quietly carry without putting it into words. That is why it feels so personal. Not everyone avoids these questions forever. Some simply take longer to notice them, and even longer to admit them. Life has a way of bringing them back, usually at moments when the simple answers no longer feel enough. And when people finally face those questions, something unexpected happens. They do not always lose faith. They do not suddenly abandon everything they once believed. Instead, something softer shifts. The certainty fades, but in its place comes something more grounded. A willingness to admit complexity. Because the real change is not about belief itself. It is about how honestly you hold it. Sometimes the story remains, the meaning remains, but the illusion that it was ever simple quietly disappears.